They locked her outside to freeze while the castle celebrated, and woke the one power the Alpha King could never cage. She was locked outside to freeze until the Alpha King defied every law for her. The stone was wet enough to bite. It soaked straight through Lyra's thin trousers, leaching the heat from her bones as she scrubbed at a stain that wasn't really there. Her raw knuckles burned. Her shoulders ached. The great hall roared around her. Clattering platters shouted orders, the thump of barrels being rolled into place, but not a single eye turned her way. Perfect. If they didn't look at her, they couldn't spit at her. Steam and spice rolled out of the kitchens in thick waves. Roasted boar, honeyed carrots, mulled wine cut with cinnamon and orange peel. The scents curled into Lyra's empty stomach, making it twist cruelly. She swallowed, kept her head down, and scrubbed. "Mind your bucket, traitor's whelp," a scullion snapped as he swept past with a tray of polished cups. She jerked the water closer to her knees, nodding without looking up. Her hair fell like a curtain around her face. Mousy, tangled, plain, good. It made her smaller. Two noblewomen glided past, silk skirts whispering over the stone. Their laughter rang as bright and brittle as icicles. "Is she still here?" one murmured, loudly enough to carry. "I thought Lord Corran had finally convinced the Alpha King to cast her out." "Not yet," the other replied. "Perhaps he keeps her as a reminder of what betrayal looks like up close." They both snickered. Lyra's hand slipped. Soapy water splashed her wrist. She scrubbed harder. Back and forth, back and forth. If she focused on the circle of foam, she could pretend none of it touched her. "You're alive," she reminded herself. Alive is more than Father got. Father, who had once been captain of the King's Guard. Father, whose name had been hissed from every mouth as the man who'd betrayed the old king and shattered the realm's trust in a single night. Father, whose body had never been returned to his daughter. The head steward's clap cracked through the hall like a lash. "Enough!" Jorek bellowed. He was a thick man with a beer barrel chest and a permanent sneer, his gray hair slicked back like wet rope. "The feast begins within the hour. The Alpha King expects perfection, not the slop you lot usually manage." His small eyes swept over the staff, cold, calculating, and then snagged on her. There it was, the flinch, the sour curl of his lip. "You." He jabbed a finger at Lyra. Her stomach plummeted. "I've almost finished the entryway, steward. You are finished for the night," Jorek snapped. "No Omega with your blood is to be seen anywhere near the high feast." The council was clear. Out. Heat flooded her cheeks. "I can stay in the back." "Out." He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Get to the yard. I don't want your cursed shadow on my floor when the Alpha arrives. You don't come back in until sunrise, or you can keep going right through the gates." The words hit harder than a slap. Nearby servants paused, glances flicking her way before quickly sliding elsewhere. No one spoke. No one stepped in. They never did. Lyra pushed herself to her feet, legs numb from kneeling. Her knees popped. Her palms left wet ghost prints on the stone. She kept her head down as she crossed the hall, heart hammering loud enough she was certain everyone could hear. No one stopped her. The massive oak doors groaned as they swung inward to admit a fresh rush of nobles, then thudded closed behind her as she slipped out. The iron bolt slid into place with a final, merciless clank. On the other side of the wood, warmth blossomed. Light, music, laughter swelling as the feast truly began. Out here, the corridor breathed cold. "Fine," she muttered to herself. Outside then. If they wanted her gone, she'd go further than they expected. The small yard behind the kitchens was ringed in stone and piled with crates and barrels, a forgotten slice of the world where smoke and frost tangled in the air. The snow there was half melted and trampled, the ground a patchwork of ice and mud. Lyra slipped onto a broken crate and dragged her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders. Wind knifed through the courtyard, bringing the distant echo of music from the other side of the castle. She could almost see it in her mind's eye. The torches, the glittering gowns, the Alpha King on his black throne. They feasted. She shivered on rotten wood, fingers numb, breath fogging white. Maybe that was fitting. The traitor's daughter outside in the dark, while the loyal danced in the light. Inside, the heat felt like an enemy. Cade sat on the obsidian throne at the end of the great hall, hands relaxed on the carved wolf heads, jaw clenched hard enough to crack. Fire blazed in 3 enormous hearths. Candles burned in clustered forests along the walls. Bodies packed the space between in a crush of perfume, and power, and ambition. They laughed for him, toasted him, flattered him. His wolf wanted to tear the room apart. The beast paced inside his ribs, restless and wild. The din of voices scraped against it like grit in an open wound. The scent of roasted meat and spiced wine did nothing to soothe the thing inside him. It wanted blood and snow and the clean, sharp tang of the hunt. "Your Majesty." Lord Corran leaned in from Cade's right, his voice smoothed with age and experience. The old wolf's hair was iron gray, his robes cut perfectly, his smile courtly and shallow. "A word." Cade didn't turn his head. "Speak." The northern lords grow impatient. Corran's gaze flicked briefly toward a cluster of nobles at the far table, then back. "They expected you to announce an engagement by the winter solstice. Lady Vespera is more than suitable." Vespera sat near the dais in a gown of blue, so pale it was nearly silver, her platinum hair piled in an intricate twist. She caught his eye and smiled, slow and deliberate. Beautiful, Cade thought, cold as a drawn blade left in snow. "My temper is not yours to manage with marriage contracts," he said quietly. Corran's lips thinned. "With respect, my king, your temper is everyone's problem." His gaze flicked, just for an instant, to the nearest hearth, where blackened gouges cut up the stone as though something with claws had flailed there once. "The pack needs stability. A Luna will steady you." His wolf slammed against its cage at the word steady. The beast didn't want steady. It wanted something it had never named aloud, something raw and real and missing. Cade sucked in a breath, scented with steam and sweat and lies. The hall shrank around him. He stood. Conversation faltered. Heads turned. "I need air," he said flatly, and stepped down from the dais. 2 guards moved to follow. He cut them off with a single word. "Alone." They froze, then bowed, dropping back as he strode through the hall. Nobles scrambled to get out of his way. The music faltered, then kept playing in a shaky scramble. The towering doors at the end of the hall opened, spilling him into the cooler, dimmer corridor beyond. Silence struck like a slap. Cade inhaled deeply, letting the cold stone breath of the castle fill his lungs. It helped. A little. The constant buzz in his head dropped from a roar to a growl. He walked without thinking, boots loud in the empty passageways, turning corners by instinct rather than intent, away from the throne room, away from the council chamber, away from the rooms where his father's ghost lingered in memory and expectation, down into the servants' corridors, past shuttered windows rimed with frost, through a narrow arch that most nobles had long forgotten, out into a small, half-ruined yard behind the kitchens. Snow drifted lazily from a flat gray sky. Smoke curled from the chimneys high overhead. The world here was quiet, except for the faint rattle of a loose shutter and the crunch of his boots on half-frozen mud. And a scent. It hit him like a blade to the heart. Not perfumed oil or spiked wine. Not the familiar musk of packmates or the reek of fear. This was something cleaner, wilder, impossibly sharp. Frostbitten lilac, smoke after rain. The metallic tang of blood swallowed back instead of shed. His wolf stopped. For the first time in months, maybe years, the beast inside him went utterly, terrifyingly still. Cade froze, mid-step, chest stuttering, as the scent wrapped around him. It pulled, invisible and inexorable, toward the shadow slumped against the far wall. A small figure curled in on itself, cloak dusted with snow, knees hugged to chest. Shivering, he saw chapped hands, raw and pink, a pale face half hidden by tangled hair, breath coming in little broken clouds. An Omega, a servant, a nobody, and his entire world shifted. Lyra didn't hear him at first. Her teeth were chattering so hard, her skull hurt. Her fingers had passed through pain into a deep, terrifying numbness that felt like someone else's hands laid in her lap. She'd tried tucking them under her arms. The wind had crawled under her cloak anyway. The music from inside the castle swelled, then muffled again as doors opened and closed somewhere far away. She tried to imagine the warmth, but it only made the cold feel sharper. A new scent knifed through the air and sliced her thoughts off mid-groan. Ozone and pine, and something darker beneath, like iron left in a storm. Dominance. Power. A storm on two legs. Her head snapped up. Startled eyes locking onto the silhouette of a man just inside the archway. Broad shoulders, dark hair, the faint sheen of embroidered black and silver across his chest. A presence that bent the air around him. The Alpha King. Every drop of blood in her body seemed to freeze solid. She lurched to her feet so fast, she slipped, catching herself on the wall. Her breath hitched. She looked wildly for an escape, any escape, but there was nowhere to go. Stone walls, closed doors, him. She dropped into a clumsy bow instead, eyes on the ground. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I was sent out. I'll go further. Wait. The word wasn't loud, but it cut through the yard like a blade. Something in it, raw, disbelieving, made her look up before she could stop herself. His eyes met hers. They were silver, yes, but not the flat silver she'd imagined from a distance. Up close, they were molten, swirling like mercury caught in sunlight. For a heartbeat, they held shock, confusion, something like pain. Then, something vast and wild slammed through her. The world narrowed to the space between his pupils and her lungs. A tug from somewhere behind her heart, sharp enough to draw a gasp. Her knees wobbled. The cold vanished, replaced by a flood of heat that raced along her veins, setting every nerve on fire. His wolf, she didn't see, but she felt. It reared on the other side of their locked gazes, roaring silent and jubilant. Mine. The word didn't pass his lips. It didn't need to. It thrummed inside her skull all the same. No, Lyra whispered, though she didn't know what she was denying. The impossible bond, the way her soul lurched toward his, or the way his hand lifted, fingers trembling, as if dragged by a force he couldn't fight. He stepped forward slowly, like a man wading into a river he wasn't sure would carry him away. "You're freezing," he said hoarsely. "I'm fine," she lied. Her lips were numb. The words came out slurred. He reached her in 2 strides. Up close, he was even larger, the heat of his body slamming into her like she'd leaned against an oven. Steam rose, faintly, from his breath. His fingers brushed her cheek. The calloused warmth of his skin against her ice-burned flesh sent lightning bursting behind her eyes. She sucked in a shocked breath. He growled, a low, involuntary sound deep in his chest. Not anger, but a visceral response that vibrated in her bones. "Who did this?" he asked. She blinked. "Did what?" "Sent you out here." His gaze flicked over her thin cloak, her trembling hands, the half-frozen mud under her boots. Rage built in his scent, hot and metallic. "Who?" "Steward Jorek." The name slipped out before she could think better of it. "He said the council didn't want my filth near the feast." His eyes went colder than the wind. "Your name?" he demanded. "Lyra." She swallowed. "Lyra Fenn, my lord." His nostrils flared. Fenn. He knew it. Of course he did. Everyone did. Traitor. Murderer. The man who had killed Cade's father. Lyra sucked her shoulders tighter, waiting for the disgust, the condemnation, the order to get out of his sight. Instead, his fingers tightened around her arm. "Come with me," he said. She stumbled as he turned, dragging her toward the door. "Your Majesty? No, please. I'm not allowed inside during—" "Who decides who is allowed in my halls?" Cade snarled. "Me, or a steward who thinks himself king?" She had no answer to that. The door into the servants' corridor slammed open before them. Warm air hit her like a blow. Her numb skin prickled with painful pins and needles. They passed a pair of scullions, who flattened themselves against the wall with wide eyes. "Majesty." "Nothing happened," Cade said, without looking at them. "You saw nothing." They reached the back of the great hall in a swirl of heat and noise. Lyra dug her heels in. "Please," she whispered, panic clawing at her throat. I'll be punished. I don't belong in there." He stopped just before the massive doors. For a moment, all the fury dropped off his face, leaving him stripped bare in a way that made her chest ache. "Out there," he said softly, nodding back toward the yard. "You were dying by inches, so my court could drink and laugh 2 walls away. You do not belong in the snow, Lyra Fenn." His hand tightened. "You belong where I say you belong." He shoved the doors open. The hall went silent in a single, collective breath. Music scraped to a halt. Words died mid-toast. Heads turned like a field of flowers following the sun, tracking the Alpha King as he strode back in, dripping melted snow, jaw set, and holding the arm of the one person no one expected to see at his side. The traitor's daughter. Lyra wanted to sink through the floor. Heat scorched her cheeks. The sudden blaze of candlelight stung her eyes after the dim yard. Every gaze landed on the smear of mud on her hem. The damp cloak, the half-frozen girl dragged into their golden world. "Majesty," Lord Corrin said from near the dais, recovering first. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "What is the meaning of this?" Cade didn't slow. He guided Lyra straight down the center of the hall, past tables, nobles, who recoiled like she carried plague, past Lady Vespera, whose painted mouth curled in disgust, past Steward Jorek, who had gone the color of old parchment. Only when they reached the open space before the throne did he stop. His hand stayed wrapped around Lyra's arm, a hot brand that anchored her to the moment as much as it trapped her in it. "This Omega," Cade said, his voice echoing off the high stone, "was locked outside in the yard on this night, in this cold, while we feast." No one breathed. Jorek swallowed noisily. "My king, Silence. Cade's gaze snapped to him. "Did you order it?" The steward's throat bobbed again. "The council, Lord Corrin said—" "Oh, do not drag my name into your incompetence," Corrin cut in smoothly. "No one told you to throw anyone into the snow. The girl belongs in the servants' quarters at best. Not. His eyes flicked over Lyra, dismissive. There. Lyra flinched. Cade heard the sound of her breath, sharp and small, and something dark uncoiled in him. She belongs under my protection, he said. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Your protection. Vespera's voice rang out, crystalline and incredulous. Majesty, she is the daughter of Terran Fen. That family name is a stain on this court. You cannot mean to. She has a name, Cade snapped. Lyra, say it, if you're going to speak about her. Vespera's lips pressed into a thin line. Corin stepped closer, hands spread in a soothing gesture that didn't match the keen calculation in his eyes. My king, no one questions your mercy, but perhaps a private arrangement would be more prudent. Keeping her here in front of the court only invites gossip. Let the girl go back to her duties and— No. The word dropped like a stone into a frozen lake. Cade turned to his nearest guards. You will escort Lyra Fen to my chambers, he said. She will remain there, under my protection, until I say otherwise. No one approaches her without my permission. No one touches her. His gaze swept the hall, daring anyone to challenge. Silence answered. Is that understood? He asked. Dozens of voices responded as one, shaky but obedient. Yes, Alpha King. Lyra stared up at him, throat tight. Why? She whispered, too quiet for anyone else to hear. Because my wolf is singing your name, he wanted to say. Because when I found you in the snow, the raging thing inside me went quiet for the first time in years. Because you smelled like frost and survival and something I'm not sure I deserve. All he managed was, because you should never have been out there. He let go of her arm, only when the guards took their place at her sides. Her skin felt colder where his hand had been. As they led her away, weaving through a sea of stunned faces, someone hissed, Curse! Another whispered, Witch! Lyra kept walking. The heavy doors to the hall closed behind her, cutting off the rising tide of voices. Inside, the storm was just beginning. The king's chambers were another world entirely. Lyra had never crossed the threshold of this wing before. Servants whispered about it as a place where orders went in and roars came out. She'd imagined something sharp-edged and cold, stone and steel and shadow. It was all of that, and more. The guards ushered her into a vast room where a fire big enough to roast an ox snarled in a wide stone hearth. Wolf pelts layered over thick carpets softened the floor. The bed at the far end was large enough to drown in, its posts carved with running wolves and moons. Weapons lined one wall, swords, spears, axes, each polished to a dull gleam. Stay here, one guard said awkwardly, as if he weren't sure how to speak to someone the king had just placed under personal protection. Food will be brought. They left. The door shut with a soft thump that was somehow more final than any slam. Lyra stood in the center of the room, cloak dripping onto fur and embroidery, and tried to breathe. The air smelled like him, pine and steel and faint smoke. It wrapped around her until she felt dizzy. This is a mistake, she thought, wildly. They'll drag me out by my hair before dawn. The king will come to his senses and— She caught sight of the wall beside the hearth and froze. 4 deep gouges scored down the stone, each furrow as wide as 3 fingers, as if something with claws, the length of daggers, had dragged them there in a moment of blind fury. Her gaze skipped, suddenly sharp, across the room. She saw it then, hairline fractures in the edge of a wooden chest, as though it had been kicked hard enough to crack. A dent in a metal goblet abandoned on the table, crushed slightly out of shape, evidence of storms. Her father had told stories about the old king's wolf, controlled, disciplined, never turning that fury on his own walls. Lyra ran her fingers lightly over one of the gouges in the stone. The cold bit her fingertips. The door opened behind her. She snatched her hand back as if burned and spun. Cade stood in the doorway, dim light from the corridor haloing his broad frame, before the door shut and the firelight claimed him. His gaze flicked to her hand near the wall. His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't touch those," he said. "They're sharp." "So I see," she replied, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. He stepped further into the room, tugging at the high collar of his formal coat as if it choked him. Up close, she could see the faint stubble along his jaw, the exhausted shadows under his eyes. "This was not the plan," he muttered, more to himself than to her, and poured wine into a goblet that didn't already bear the marks of his temper. His hand shook, just a little, as he lifted it. "What was the plan?" she asked. "Leave me in the yard until my fingers turned black?" His head snapped up. A flicker of something like shame crossed his face, quickly buried. "No," he said. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." Lyra let out a short, joyless laugh. Kings rarely know who's in their shadows. Their eyes locked. Power hummed between them, low and insistent. "You think I shouldn't have brought you here," he said. "You don't say." She gestured to the riot of luxury around them. "Do you have any idea what they'll do to me for this? When they're done making your life miserable with whispers about your poor taste, they'll come for me. They already wanted me gone." "They can try," he growled, a dangerous edge in his voice. "They will find I have teeth. And they have knives in your back." She shot back, heat flaring through her fear. "I've spent my life listening in kitchens and doorways, Your Majesty. I know how this works. When nobles want someone gone, they don't always do it in the open." His hand tightened on the goblet until the metal groaned faintly. "I will not let them touch you," he said. "You can't guard me from every poisoned cup," she said quietly. "Every accident on the stairs, every knife in the dark. Not if I'm here." Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. "You'd rather freeze outside?" he asked at last. "I'd rather be invisible," she said. It was safer. A muscle jumped in his jaw. "Being invisible is not safety," he said. "It's drowning in plain sight." She didn't have an answer to that. He took a breath, shoulders rising and falling. "Regardless," he said, voice turning iron again. "What's done is done. You'll stay here tonight." She opened her mouth to argue. A sharp knock at the outer door cut her off. Cade swore under his breath. "Stay in here," he told Lyra, then stepped into the small antechamber between his private rooms and the corridor, leaving the inner door cracked. Voices filtered through. "My king," Lord Corrin said smoothly, "Lady Vespera and I request a word. Now is not. It concerns the future of your reign." Vespera cut in, voice cool as glass. "And the girl." Lyra moved closer to the crack in the door, heart thudding. Eavesdropping on the Alpha King was probably a flogging offense. But then, so was existing in some circles. "That girl is under my protection," Cade said. "Choose your words carefully. A stray Omega under your roof, in your bedchamber." Vespera's tone sharpened. "The court is already whispering that you've lost control." "The court has always whispered," he said. "It's their favorite sport." "Do not dismiss this, Cade," Corrin said, dropping the honorific in the familiarity of an old mentor. "You know as well as I do that your recent outbursts have unnerved your allies. Bringing the Fen girl into your chambers only reinforces their fears." Her father betrayed my father, Cade said. She bears enough of a burden without your venom. Corin sighed. We all know what Taryn Fen did. The blood of traitors runs deep. Heat flashed up Lyra's spine, hot enough to burn through her fear. Her nails bit into her palms. My father died, Cade said slowly, with a blade in his back. I have never once seen proof that blade belonged to Taryn Fen. Proof? Corin's laugh was soft and vicious. You need proof now. You would doubt the council's account after all these years. I would doubt the gods themselves tonight, Cade snarled. Do not test me. Vespera broke in before Corin could respond. Whatever you believe about her father, the facts are plain. The northern packs are restless. Alpha Draven circles like a vulture at the border, waiting for a sign of weakness. They demand you announce a Luna by the blood moon. Vespera, you are unraveling, Cade, she said quietly. You know it. Your wolf is tearing your insides apart. A political match would anchor you. A sentimental entanglement with a disgraced Omega will not. Lyra's breath hitched. A sentimental entanglement, Cade repeated, voice flat as a dead plane. Is that what you think this is? What else could it be? Mate bonds are rare enough, and even if the goddess were so cruel as to bind you to her, you know what must be done. Corin's voice slid in, silken and poisonous. You are a king before you are a man, my boy. The pack comes first, always. Whatever you feel for this girl, it cannot outweigh your duty. Give her a purse of coin. Send her away quietly. Announce your betrothal to Lady Vespera at the blood moon. The unrest will settle. Draven will be placated. Your temper will even. This illness will pass. Illness. Lyra pressed a fist to her mouth to keep from making a sound. The silence that followed stretched long enough to hurt. When Cade finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, and so tired it scraped. I don't know, he said. 3 small words, heavy as stones. I don't know what this is. I don't know why my wolf went quiet when I found her in the snow. I don't know why I can't breathe when she looks at me like I've set her world on fire and ruined it in the same breath. A bitter laugh. Maybe it is an illness. Maybe fate made a mistake. But I know this. I am running out of time. You have until the blood moon, Corin said gently, as if offering comfort instead of shackles. Choose wisely, Cade. Your crown or your heart. Only one will survive. Footsteps. The outer door opened, then shut. Lyra backed away from the crack in the door as though burned. An illness. A mistake. That's what she was to him. Whatever wild, impossible thing had sparked between them in the yard wasn't some divine thread. It was a sickness he needed to cut out. Her chest felt like it was caving in. They didn't speak the next morning. Cade dressed in ceremonial black, jaw carved. From stone, eyes avoiding hers, as if looking at her too long might crack his resolve. He left for council at dawn, cloak snapping behind him like a shadow. Lyra sat on the edge of his vast bed, still in her thin servant's tunic, staring at the place where his hand had gripped her arm the night before. If I am a mistake, she thought, at least let me be the last one he makes. By midday, the summons came. Not to her, to everyone else. The castle buzzed like a hive stirred with a stick. Servants whispered in corridors. Nobles gathered in 2s and 3s, eyes bright with anticipation. The Alpha King has called a formal assembly. Someone murmured in the stairwell outside Cade's chambers. In the throne room, now. He'll announce the betrothal, another voice said. He has to. After last night, there's no other way to salvage it. And the Fen girl, someone else asked, dripping with glee. What do you think happens to her when he's done pretending she's not poison? Lyra didn't wait to hear the answer. She slipped out of the chamber as quietly as she could and followed the stream of bodies toward the great hall. No one noticed the servant with her head down, swallowed in the tide of fine wool and polished boots. She reached the back of the hall and pressed herself into the shadow of a pillar. Cade stood on the dais, crown of black iron and silver wolves resting heavy on his dark hair. Corin stood at his shoulder, eyes glittering. Vespera waited below, wearing a gown of deep red that made her look like she'd been dipped in blood. "My people," Cade began. The hall fell silent. "There has been unrest," he said. "Questions, rumors, all stemming from one thing." His gaze swept the hall and landed, just for a heartbeat, on Lyra in the shadows. Her lungs forgot how to function. "This court has long believed that one name is synonymous with treason," he said. "Fen." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, like a wind over grass. "Lyra Fen has been allowed to remain within these walls as an act of mercy." "That mercy," Cade said, and now his voice hardened, "has proven to be a mistake." Pain lanced through Lyra's chest. "Her presence has disrupted the order of my house and the stability of my reign," he said. "For the sake of this kingdom, that disruption must end." Corin's mouth twitched in satisfaction. Cade's hand curled around the arm of his throne hard enough that the carved wolf head cracked with a quiet, sick sound. "From this moment," he said, "Lyra Fen's sanctuary is revoked. She is to be escorted from these grounds and may never return on pain of death." The world slowed. He looked at her then, directly, no more avoiding, no more pretending she was not carved into the inside of his skull. His eyes were calm, cold, and behind that, a storm howled. "She is nothing to me," he finished. Something inside her snapped. Not her heart. That had shattered last. Night. This was deeper, stranger. The invisible thread that had stretched between them since the courtyard, the thrum at the edge of her awareness that matched his breathing, his anger, his every shift, went taut as wire, then broke. The soundless tear cut through her soul. The floor vanished. The torches along the walls exploded in bright, white fire that wasn't fire at all. Frost roared across the flagstones from where she stood, etching wild, spiraling patterns in its wake. The air dropped from warm to bitter cold in a heartbeat, breath steaming from every mouth. Nobles gasped. Someone screamed. Lyra didn't fall. The moment the bond severed, something else surged up to fill the void. A tide of silver light and bone-deep cold that crashed through her veins like a river released from a dam. She straightened slowly. When she opened her eyes, the world looked different, sharper, brighter. Every breath in the room hung in the air, like threads she could touch. Every heartbeat thrummed against her skin. Her fingers curled. Moonlight crackled along her knuckles. "By the goddess," someone whispered. Her eyes, they weren't brown anymore. Reflected in a polished shield on the wall, she saw twin orbs of pale silver, glowing softly, as if someone had trapped twin moons in her skull. At the far edge of the hall, a thin, grizzled lord with scars along his jaw stared at her, as though he were seeing a ghost. "Moonrot," he breathed, "just like her mother." Cade's heart stopped. He'd known, the moment the words left his mouth, that he'd broken something sacred. He'd done it anyway, because Corin had painted him into a corner with blood and duty. Lie to her in public, the old wolf had said, and she might live. Claim her, and every enemy will aim for her throat. So Cade had lied. He felt the bond tear like flesh, leaving a raw, gaping wound in its wake. Then The hall exploded with frost and light. He stared, rooted to the dais, as Lyra stood in the center of a storm that bowed to her command. Ice climbed the pillars in delicate crystalline veins. Mist curled between her bare fingers. Her cloak whipped in a wind that hadn't been there 3 heartbeats before. Moon-wrought, the old lord had said. Old stories rose from Cade's childhood. Tales whispered when the fires had burned low. Women with silver eyes and magic in their blood. Guardians of the royal line, chosen by the moon goddess to keep kings honest. Hunted to extinction when power-hungry men had decided they made better weapons than protectors. That bloodline had died out, he'd been told. Lies. How many lies had he swallowed whole? Clear the hall, he heard himself say, voice distant in his own ears. Soldiers moved, herding nobles out through the side doors. Some went willingly, eager to flee the freezing air. Others lingered, staring, until a snapped order from Cade sent them scurrying. Only when the great space had thinned to a handful of guards, Lord, Corin, Lady Vespera, and the scarred lord who'd spoken, did Cade step down from the dais. Lyra, he said. She turned her head slowly toward him. There was no heat in her gaze now, no wild swelling hope, just a cold, so pure it burned. You did this, she said softly. He flinched. You broke it. Her hand lifted, fingers curling in the air between them. Whatever was between us, you tore it apart. Because if I hadn't, they would have killed you, he wanted to say. Because I thought I could live with my own misery better than I could live with your blood on my floor. How long have you known? He asked instead, because his brain was breaking, and his mouth had always been his worst enemy. She laughed, short and sharp. Frost crackled at her feet. Known what? That I'm an illness, a mistake, or that there's something wrong in my veins that your council fears? I don't fear you, he said. That might be your biggest mistake yet, she replied. Enough of this, Corin snapped, stepping forward. Whatever she is dangerous. We saw the bond break. The goddess herself has withdrawn her blessing. This display is witchcraft, nothing more. The scarred lord rounded on him. You dare call the old blood witchcraft. Your predecessor on the council lied about Taran Fen. He lied about the old king's death. Will you repeat his sins, Corin? What are you talking about, Bryn? Cade demanded. Lord Bryn dropped to one knee, head bowed. Forgive me, my king, he said. I've kept a secret I swore to take to my grave. I thought it the only way to keep her alive. But the lies have twisted too far. He looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. Taran Fen did not murder your father, he said. He died saving him from his own folly. The old king dabbled in shadow magic to try and strengthen the royal bloodline. He lost control of what he summoned. Taran and his moon-wrought mate, Lyra's mother, fought what came through. They killed it, but it took both of them and your father with it. Lyra swayed. The floor lurched. The storm around her faltered. No, she whispered. No, you're lying. On my life, Bryn said. I was there. I held your father's body. I watched Lord Farron of the council step over it and say, we will not let the realm see a fool on the throne. Blame the guard. Blame the moonwrought. They are convenient corpses. Corin's face went ashen. You misunderstand. You continued the lie, Bryn snapped. You let his daughter scrub your floors and freeze in your yard under a name you knew was cursed unjustly. The chamber shook faintly. It took Cade a heartbeat too long to realize it was his own rage, rattling in his bones. He turned slowly to Corin. You knew, he said quietly. Corin swallowed. My king, you knew what my father had done, Cade said, each word precise enough to cut. You knew Taran Fen, died trying to stop him. You watched me hate the man who saved my father's life. You let me speak his name with poison on my tongue. It was necessary. For what? Cade roared. For your power. For your tidy stories. For your damned stability. He took a step toward Corin. The old wolf flinched. A young scout burst into the half-frozen hall, breath steaming, snow crusting his boots. My king, he gasped, dropping to one knee in a spray of frost. Forgive the intrusion. Alpha Draven of the Black Peak Pack has crossed the northern border. He comes with his whole war host. Of course he does, Cade thought wearily. His word, Cade asked, because there were rules to this. Even when the world was cracking, the scout clenched his jaw. He says, your rejection of a fated moonwrought mate proves the goddess has withdrawn her favor. He calls you unfit to rule. He demands a duel at the blood moon for the throne, and for the moonwrought herself. His gaze flicked, just once, to Lyra. Cade's wolf surged forward, teeth bared. Over my dead body, Cade said. That is precisely his intent, my king, Corin said softly. Bryn got her out. One moment Lyra was standing ankle-deep in frost in the shattered hall, the king and his council and the world lurching around her. The next, a rough, calloused hand closed around her wrist and tugged. Come, Lord Bryn whispered. Why should I trust you? She hissed. Because I served your father before I served any king, he said. And because if Draven gets his hands on you now, we will all drown in the blood that follows. That was hard to argue with. He hustled her through a side door, while Cade barked orders at his generals, and Corin tried to regain his footing. The corridors blurred. They ducked through a hidden panel Lyra hadn't known existed. Cold stone scraped her shoulders as they squeezed along a narrow passage that smelled of dust and mouse droppings. By the time they emerged into the night again, they were outside the outer wall, snow crunching under their boots, the castle a dark bulk looming behind them. Bryn led her into the trees, following paths only he seemed to see. Lyra stumbled, still half-dazed, frost blooming under her feet with each panicked step. They reached a small hunting cabin tucked into a hollow between rocks, half buried in drifts. Bryn shoved the door open, lit a stub of candle from a flint, and sighed. Stay here, he said. It's warded as well as I know how. No one from the court will find it easily. Draven's wolves. That's another matter. He grimaced. I'll go back. See if I can knock some sense into our king before he does something truly foolish. More foolish than throwing me away in front of everyone? Lyra asked bitterly. Bryn's gaze softened. I saw the way he looked at you, he said. He thought he was saving you by doing it. Kings are idiots when it comes to love. I don't love him, she lied. He smiled sadly. You don't have to convince me of anything, girl. Only yourself. He left before she could answer, disappearing back into the trees like a ghost. The cabin was small and rough. One room, a narrow bed, a stone hearth that hadn't seen a fire in months. Lyra gathered the scattered wood, coaxed flame from tinder with shaking hands, and sat as close to the warmth as she could get without singing her hair. Exhaustion crashed over her. In the space where the bond had been, there was a gaping silence. It hurt worse than any physical wound. She didn't know how long she sat there, watching the fire chew slowly through the logs, long enough for the candle to burn down, long enough for the wind outside to pick up, howling through the cracks. A twig snapped. Lyra's head jerked up. Her power flared instinctively, the air around her shimmering with cold. The door creaked open. Cade stepped in. He looked like he'd run through the forest, without caring what branches tore at him. Snow clung to his dark hair. Blood stained his left sleeve. His eyes found her in the firelight and softened in a way that hurt more than anything Corin had said. "I shouldn't have lied," he said, without preamble. She stood slowly. "No," she agreed. "You shouldn't have." He took a breath, like a man about to leap from a cliff. "I let fear drive me," he said. "Fear of losing control, of losing you, of losing the crown my father bled for, even if he bled for the wrong things. I thought if I pushed you away in public, they'd stop aiming at your heart." A humorless laugh. "Seems all I did was paint a bigger target on it." She stared at him, hands trembling. "My father," she whispered. "Was he the monster they said he was?" Cade shook his head. "No, he was a hero I never thanked, and I have spent my life wearing a crown built on his grave." Tears burned her eyes. She refused to let them fall. "So what now?" she asked. "You'll march back and tell them you changed your mind? Sorry about the spectacle. Actually, she is something to me? That's not how politics works." "No," he said. "It's not. Then why are you here?" "Because Draven is coming," Cade said, stepping closer. "Because Corin has been whispering in his ear as well as mine. Because they want you for your power. And his jaw flexed. "I want you for you. And because if I die tomorrow, under a blood moon, I will not have it said that I left the one thing that ever quieted my wolf, thinking she was unwanted." He reached for her hand. She flinched back. "You already died," she said thickly. "When you broke it, I felt it snap. The bond. The silence was, I thought you were gone." His brows drew together. "That wasn't death. That was cowardice. I pushed, cut at it from my side. Maybe the goddess finally took pity on us and severed it clean before it rotted." His mouth twisted. "I won't ask you to forgive that." "Good," she said. "Because I don't." He nodded once, accepting the blow. "I will ask one thing," he said softly. "Let me stand between you and Draven tomorrow. If he wants the moon rot, he has to go through the Alpha King." "Your council says you're unfit to rule," she said. "Draven calls for your throne. Corin plots. I am the excuse they're using to do what they always wanted to do. Then we'll take their excuse," Cade said, "and turn it into their execution." His lips quirked, humor flickering despite the weight pressing down on them. "Come back to the castle with me," he said. "We'll dig out every old law they thought we were too stupid to remember. If Draven wants a duel for the throne, he can have it, in front of witnesses, under the goddess's eye. And if he wins?" she asked quietly. His gaze didn't waver. "Then I hope you freeze his bones from the inside out before he can touch you." Despite everything, her grief, her anger, the gaping wound where their bond had been, something hot and fierce stirred in her chest, not because he promised to die for her, because he trusted her to avenge him. She stepped toward him, closing the distance until she could feel the heat of his body, the wild thrum of his wolf just under his skin. "I'm not your illness," she said. "No," he agreed. "You're my cure, whether I deserve it or not." The door banged open. Guards poured in, Cade's elite, but their eyes were wrong, flat, distant, the subtle tell of obedience paid to the man behind them rather than the king. Lord Corin stepped into the cabin, snow dusting his shoulders. "I did warn you, my boy," he said quietly. "Love makes kings stupid." Cade moved instinctively, putting himself between Lyra and the door. "Stand down," he ordered his guards. No one moved. Corin sighed. "By law of the Council of Elders, I declare the Alpha King unfit," he said. "Your reckless bond with the moon rot has thrown this realm into chaos. For the good of the pack, you will be relieved of command." "You don't have that authority," Cade snarled. "Perhaps not alone," Corin said, "but with Draven at my back." Heavy footfalls shook the snow outside. A shadow filled the doorway. Alpha Draven ducked into the cabin, bringing the cold with him. He was taller than Cade, broader through the shoulders, his dark hair shot with silver at the temples, his face crisscrossed with scars that looked like they'd never fully healed. His eyes were black as volcanic glass. He looked Lyra over like a butcher inspecting a prize carcass. "The moon rot," he rumbled. "At last." Cade's wolf slammed against his skin. "She is not yours," he growled. Draven smiled lazily. "We'll let the blood moon decide that," he said, "as the law requires." They agreed, terms in steel and snarls. At dawn, on the night of the blood moon, on the flat plain below the castle, the two alphas would meet in single combat. No arrows from the shadows, no poison, no interference. Winner takes the throne. Draven insisted the moonrot be held in his camp as surety. Cade refused, until Corin pointed out, in a voice full of fake concern, that any sign of the king hiding her would invalidate the duel and give Draven reason to take what he wanted by force. "Better a chain now than a slaughter later," the old wolf said, eyes smooth and cold. Lyra watched Cade grind his teeth, bloody on the decision. "Don't," she said quietly, when they were alone for a heartbeat. "Don't break yourself on this. If he needs a hostage to feel brave enough to face you, I can be a hostage." His hands shook where they cupped her face. "I'll get you back," he said. "I swear it." "You better," she said, because humor was the only thing keeping terror from eating her alive. "If you let that scarred ox put his hands on me, I will haunt you." He huffed a short laugh that sounded more like a sob. He kissed her forehead, swift and fierce, as if he were afraid letting his lips linger would crack something they couldn't repair. Then Draven's wolves took her. Silver-laced chains bit into her wrists as they marched her north, away from the castle's looming shadow and into the jagged teeth of the Black Peak Range. Every step away from Cade stretched the ghost of their bond thinner. By the time the war camp came into view, a sprawl of black tents and smoldering fires in a snow-choked valley, she felt like the world itself was slightly out of focus. Draven's personal tent was larger than the rest, lined with furs taken from animals and enemies alike. He chained her to a post there, like a prized hound, smiling faintly when she glared at him. "You think I need your soul to bend you?" he said, squatting in front of her. "I don't. The moonrot bond is versatile." "Go to hell," she said. He chuckled. "I've been circling its gates for years," he said. "You'll like it," he explained, in a voice that might have been used for telling bedtime stories. How moonrot magic could be twisted. How the goddess's gift, meant to bind protectors to kings, could be hijacked, redirected, forced into service of those cunning or cruel enough to try. "With the right rituals," he said, "the right blood and silver, we can forge a bond, not of hearts, but of power. You will not love me. You don't have to. You will obey." She stared at him, horrified. "You can't steal a mate bond," she said. "That's not how it works. The goddess disagrees," he said lightly. "She made you too malleable, little moonrot. That's what happens when you leave things unfinished." His smile turned sharp. "Your king had you first and broke you. I'll bind what's left." He reached out and touched her cheek. The contact was wrong. Where Cade's touch had lit her veins. Draven's crawled along her skin like maggots. Something deep inside her recoiled. Power flared, slamming into the silver woven through her chains. Pain lanced up her arms as the magic met metal. Draven watched with interest. So much potential, he murmured. Wasted on a bleeding heart like Cade. He stood. Rest up, he said. You'll want to be fully awake when the blood moon rises. He left her staring at the tent wall, terror gnawing a hollow in her chest. Cade's first attack failed. He couldn't sit in his war room and plan while Draven had Lyra chained in a canvas cage. The moment his generals turned their backs, he slipped out into the night. Bryn and a handful of his most loyal wolves on his heels. They hit Draven's outer scouts in the dark, ripping through the first ring of sentries like a storm. For a few shining minutes, it felt possible. The enemy scattered. Snow flew. Cade's wolf howled victory inside his skin. Then the silver vine dust hit. Draven had anticipated him. The paralytic powder burst in Cade's face as he leapt over a fallen log, burning his lungs, coating his tongue in metallic sweetness. His body locked up midair. He crashed to the ground like a felled tree. He heard Bryn shout, heard snarls and screams and the clash of steel, tried to move and found his own limbs traitors. Draven stepped into his limited field of vision, boots planting in the snow inches from Cade's face. You couldn't wait for the moon like a good boy, could you? The rival Alpha said, almost fond, impulsive, emotional, weak. He nudged Cade's ribs with his toe, rolling him onto his back. I've changed my mind, Draven said conversationally. I don't think I'll kill you tomorrow. It'll be much more satisfying to beat you half to death in front of your court and leave you alive, broken, watching me take everything that was yours. Cade tried to spit in his face. His lips wouldn't move. Draven laughed. Sweet dreams, king of nothing, he said, and walked away. Cade lay in the snow, muscles locked, poison creeping through his veins, and thought, this is how it ends. Not under a red moon with a roar, but in the dark, paralyzed and helpless, while the man who wanted his queen walked away with a smile. Something inside him cracked. Not the bond. That had already been severed by his own stupidity. Something older. The part of him that believed he could still win. He stopped fighting. The world dulled. In the distance, he heard Bryn rally the survivors, drag him back to a cave where the wind screamed over the mouth and snow drifted in, piling against his boots. Someone bound his wound. Someone lit a fire. None of it mattered. The bond was gone. Lyra was in chains. His council had betrayed him. Draven's army was larger. What was the point? The goddess had made a mistake, he thought dully. She'd tied a raging, half-broken king to a girl who'd spent her life surviving in corners. Then she'd watched while he shattered her and left her in the dark. Maybe this was her correction. Maybe he deserved to fade. He let go. The last frayed thread that tied him to hope snapped. Lyra felt it. Not the precise moment his assault failed. That was a muddle of snarls and shouts outside the camp, quickly drowned under the barked orders of Draven's captains. No, she felt the moment Cade gave up. The already muted echo of him at the edge of her awareness dimmed, then went utterly dark, not cut by force, not ripped by her own rage this time, but smothered by something heavier, resignation, surrender. Her breath hitched. The void left behind was vast and silent, and horrifyingly familiar. For a heartbeat, she thought he'd died. Her vision tunneled. Blood roared in her ears. The tent walls closed in. Then, faintly, like the reflection of a star on black water, she felt it. Not him. Her. A small, steady glow in the center of the emptiness. Not outside her, not tied to someone else's heartbeat. Inside, always there. Overlooked because she'd spent her life searching outward for worth she should have found within. Lyra sucked in a breath that cut like ice. She remembered Draven's promise to twist her bond, Corin's willingness to sell her, the way the nobles had laughed when she scrubbed their floors. She remembered her father's hands guiding hers on a wooden practice sword, his voice saying, "You are not what they say, little moon. You are what you choose to be." Her fingers curled. A faint layer of frost crept over the chain around her wrist. "I am not your prize," she whispered to the empty tent, "and I am not his mistake." She closed her eyes, focused on the glow inside, and fed it everything she had. Her anger, her fear, her grief, her love, stupid and stubborn, and still tethered to a man too wrecked to believe he deserved it. The glow swelled. Silver light leaked through her lashes. The air grew sharp, tasting of snow and starlight. The silver in the chains hissed as her magic pressed against it again. It hurt, sharp and electric, but this time she didn't pull back. She leaned into the pain until it became a path. "Break," she whispered. Moon flames surged from her palms. The chains went rigid, frost racing along their length. The iron turned brittle, glittering with rime. She slammed her wrists down against her knee. The shackles shattered like glass. She didn't walk out of Draven's tent. She tore out. Canvas ripped as she shoved through the flap. Cold air slapped her in the face. Warriors cursed, leaping to their feet, hands going to weapons. They froze when they saw her. Her eyes burned silver in the torchlight. Frost swirled around her bare feet, turning packed snow to slick ice. Power crackled off her skin in subtle waves that made the hair on arms and necks stand on end. "Back!" one captain snarled, rallying faster than the rest. "She's unbound. Take her down." He lunged. Lyra flung out her hand. Moonflame erupted from her fingers in a rippling sheet, less afire than a rush of pure winter. It slammed into the captain's chest, lifting him off his feet and hurling him into a stack of barrels with a crunch. Ice crawled over his armor, pinning him where he landed. The rest of the camp hesitated. In that heartbeat, she ran. She didn't know which way the castle lay. The sky above was a smear of gray and black. The mountains ringed in jagged teeth. She followed the tug in her chest instead, the same instinct that had guided her to kindling before frostbite, to exits and kitchens filled with knives and shouting, to Cade's presence on the edge of oblivion. Snow grabbed at her ankles. Branches whipped her face. Wolves howled behind her. Some gave chase, snapping at her heels. She sent a pulse of power through the ground without looking back. Frost erupted across the forest floor. Howls turned to yelps of pain as paws skidded out from undercharging warriors, bodies slamming into trees with bone-jarring force. "Sorry," she panted under her breath. "Not sorry." Night blurred into a gray smear. Her lungs burned. Her power buzzed under her skin like a hive of angry bees, overtaxed and wild. When the ravine opened under her feet, she nearly fell in. A faint fire burned at its base, tucked into a hollow in the rock. Figures hunched around it, shadows on shadows. The scent of old blood and bitter herbs rose on the updraft. One of the figures moved, looking up. Silver eyes met silver. "Cade," she whispered. She scrambled down the icy ledges, sliding the last few feet. Bryn rose to meet her, eyes wide. "By all the gods," he muttered. "You actually did it." She barely heard him. Cade lay on a pallet of cloaks near the fire, bare to the waist, his skin chalk pale. A dark wound gaped in his side, veins around it blackened with silver poison. His chest rose and fell shallowly. Move, Lyra snapped. Men scrambled out of her way. She knelt beside him, hands hovering over the wound. Breath coming in sharp, controlled gasps. Lyra, Bryn began carefully, if you do this, you may not survive it. His wolf is mine, she said, whether he wants it or not. Her fingers touched torn flesh. Pain flared, not her own, but his, roaring up the frayed connection like a storm shoving through a narrow canyon. She gritted her teeth, held on, and poured the last of her strength into the wound. Moon flame flowed. It wasn't the fierce, blasting cold she'd used on chains and warriors. This was gentler, a river of liquid starlight that soaked into poisoned tissue and burned away corruption, leaving clean flesh tingling in its wake. She followed the silver's path, chasing tendrils of dark metal through muscle, bone, blood. It fought her, writhing like a live thing, trying to burrow deeper. She snarled back. "Get out!" she hissed. The last of the poison broke under the onslaught of her magic, dissolving into harmless ash. She pushed it out through his skin, watched blackened flakes crumble away, leaving healthy pink in their place. Then she reached further, down into the core of him, the place where she'd once found their bond and later found only a void. He'd walled it off, she realized, not because the goddess had truly cut it, but because he had wrapped his own guilt around it, like chains, and let it sink. "Idiot," she whispered. She sank her power into that dark, not forcing, not demanding, but offering, a hand held out over a precipice. "I'm here," she thought, "whether you think you deserve it or not." Light flickered. A hesitant spark flared in the black, trembling like a flame in a gale. Her magic wrapped around it, shielding, feeding, coaxing. The air in the ravine buzzed. Cade's back arched. He sucked in a ragged breath, fingers clawing at the furs beneath him. Bryn swore softly under his breath. Someone dropped to their knees and started praying. Lyra held on. The spark flared again, brighter. The void wasn't empty anymore. It was full of 1,000 shattered pieces of what they'd been, sharp edges and broken promises, and a fierce, stupid love neither of them had known how to handle. She didn't try to put them back the way they were. She melted them down, built something new out of the molten mess, a bond forged not by accident and prophecy, but by choice, and blood, and battle. Cade gasped. His eyes flew open. Silver met silver, and this time the connection between them wasn't a knife. It was a thread woven out of steel and starlight, unbreakable unless they both decided to cut it. "Lyra," he croaked. She sagged, exhausted, tears tracking hot down her cold cheeks. "Next time," she rasped. "Try not dying before the actual duel." He laughed. It hurt. It was the best sound she'd ever heard. "You came for me," he said. "I came for myself," she corrected. "You just happened to be lying in the way." Bryn snorted behind her. "King," the old wolf said, voice suddenly brisk. "Queen, the blood moon will rise tomorrow night whether you're ready or not. Draven's camp is less than a day's march from here. If you're going to survive this, we need a plan." Cade pushed himself upright slowly, wincing. Lyra slipped an arm around his back, steadying him. He leaned into her without hesitation. "We fight," he said, voice gaining strength with every word. "Not just for a throne built on lies. For something better. For a realm that doesn't leave its own to freeze outside its doors." He glanced down at Lyra. "For the girl I threw into the cold and who dragged me out of it." Her heart did something inconvenient and gooey. "Fine," she said. "But if you start making speeches during the duel, I will personally knock you out and claim the throne myself." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Deal." They married themselves, under a bleeding sky. There was no time for priests or crowns or rings, no time for silk or flowers or the weight of tradition. The shattered remains of Cade's loyalists gathered on the ridge above the plain, watching the enemy camp below spew out wolves and steal in a dark tide. The blood moon rose fat and red over the jagged horizon. Cade stood before Lyra, armor strapped tight, sword at his hip, wolf snarling just under his skin. He took her hands, rough fingers curling around her smaller ones. "In front of them," he said, nodding toward the armies setting up their lines. "In front of the goddess. In front of anyone still watching who might still care about oaths." He swallowed. "I choose you," he said simply. "Not because she tied us together, because I'm a better man with you ripping my illusions apart." Her throat tightened. "I choose me," she said, "for the first time in my life." She squeezed his hands. "And somehow that keeps circling back to you. So I suppose you're stuck with me too." He huffed a surprised laugh. "Goddess help us both," he said. They leaned in as one, teeth finding the curve of the other's neck in a mirrored gesture. The bite was gentle. The magic wasn't. Silver fire shot through their joined bond, knitting the last frayed strands into something whole and strong. When they pulled back, both of their mouths tasted of copper and starlight. "King," she said. "Queen," he replied. The howls from below signaled Draven's readiness. Time to go. Battle, Lyra discovered, was both more horrifying and more dull than the stories said. There were flashes of terror, wolves bearing down, jaws snapping, swords ringing off armor. There were long stretches of slogging through snow and blood, shouting herself hoarse, sending pulses of ice into the ground to trip charging enemies, and bursts of blinding light to give Cade openings. She stayed on a low rise at the edge of the plain, close enough to see him, far enough to see the shape of the fight. He was magnificent. His wolf was a shadow, streaking through the red-lit chaos, always moving, never letting Draven pin him in one place. Where Draven fought like a battering ram, relying on brute strength and wild swings, Cade fought like a storm given form. Hit, retreat, circle, hit again. Still, numbers mattered. Draven's warriors pressed in, even with Brynn and the Loyalists harrying their flanks. The Black Peak wolves had the advantage. Bodies piled, the air filled with the metallic reek of blood and the harsher stink of fear. Lyra tasted it all on the back of her tongue. She let it fuel her. When a volley of arrows arced toward Cade's exposed side, she snapped her hand out. A wall of ice burst from the ground, arrows shattering against it like glass. When a knot of enemy wolves tried to circle around to the ridge to reach her, she froze the slope under their paws. They went down in a tangle of fur and curses. "This is cheating," someone gasped behind her. "It's balance," she snarled. "He's been fighting with a handicap for years." The duel between Cade and Draven finally separated itself from the chaos, as they always did in the old songs. The two alphas circled each other in human form now, panting, bleeding, faces smeared with dirt. The moon painted them both in shades of red and black. "Yield," Draven called, grinning through a bloody mouth. "Admit you're not worthy, and I may let you live to watch me break your queen." Cade spat blood into the snow. "Never," he said. They crashed together. Steel met steel. Sparks flew. Draven had size and brute force. Every impact rattled up Cade's arms. But Cade had something Draven didn't, someone at his back. When Draven tried to shove Cade toward a patch of treacherous churned slush, Lyra flicked her wrist. The slush hardened under Cade's heel, just long enough for him to pivot and drive his elbow into Draven's ribs. When Draven fainted left, going for a killing thrust to Cade's exposed side, Lyra sent a flash of silver light into his eyes. He flinched, strike going wide, sword slicing Cade's arm instead of his throat. "That's it," Draven snarled. "I'm done playing fair." He lunged not at Cade this time, but at the ridge, at her. Lyra barely had time to react. He moved faster than anything that big had a right to move, cutting through the melee, sword-scattering men who tried to intercept him like they were straw. He reached the base of the rise and leapt. Lyra flung both hands out, calling up every last scrap of moonflame she had. The air between them crystallized. Draven slammed into an invisible wall of cold, so intense it screamed against his skin. Frost exploded across his chest, searing his lungs with every breath. He staggered, roaring. "Mine!" he bellowed. "You were made for kings." "You're not a king," she said softly. "You're a bully with a pack." She stepped down from the rise, power crackling around her like a storm. Cade shouted her name. Guards reached for her. She ignored them all. Draven swung his sword at her head. She ducked under it, the blade singing over her hair, grabbed his wrist with both hands, poured moonflame directly into his bones. He screamed. The cold didn't freeze him solid. That would have been mercy. It crawled along his nerves instead, 1,000 needles of ice burrowing into every joint, every tendon. His fingers spasmed. The sword dropped. His knees hit the snow. Cade was there in the next heartbeat. He didn't grandstand. He didn't make a speech. He picked up Draven's dropped sword and drove it through the other Alpha's heart with one clean, brutal thrust. The red moon watched silently as Draven's blood steamed in the snow. The battle stuttered. Enemy wolves froze, looking toward the fallen body of their Alpha. Someone dropped their weapon. It hit the ground with a dull thud that sounded louder than any war drum. Bryn stepped into the sudden quiet. "Alpha Draven is dead," he called, voice carrying across the plain. "The challenge is answered. The goddess has chosen." He pointed his sword at Cade and Lyra, standing together in the bloody snow, silver eyes and silver crown of magic gleaming under the moon. Cade of the Iron Howl and Lyra of the Moonwrought stand as king and queen of this realm, he said. Any wolf who raises a weapon against them now marks themselves traitor. Some of Draven's wolves dropped to their knees. Others hesitated. One, a big brute with a scar down his face, snarled and lifted his sword. Lyra flicked her fingers. His blade froze solid and shattered. "Sit," she said. He sat. The fight bled out of the field like water from a cracked jug. Lord Corrin died on his knees. They dragged him into the great hall a week later, wrists bound, fine robes torn. He looked smaller, without a crowd at his back, without the weight of decades of fear behind his words. Cade sat on his throne, but it had changed. The obsidian monstrosity had been dismantled and rebuilt. The carved wolves remained, but the hard edges had been softened with wood, the back lowered. The whole thing moved down one step, so he didn't literally tower above everyone. Lyra sat beside him, a simple silver circlet resting in her wild hair. She wore blue, not because tradition demanded it, but because it reminded her of twilight, the hour when things ended and began at once. "You lied to my father," Cade said, voice calm. "You lied to me. You lied to this whole realm. You watched a hero be named traitor because the truth would have cost you power." Corrin lifted his chin. "I preserved stability," he said. "Kings come and go. The council remains. The pack survived." "At what cost?" Lyra asked quietly. "Children freezing in yards while you toasted your own cleverness? Blood spilled for lies? It's not stability if the foundation is rot. It just looks solid until it collapses on everyone." Corin sneered. Spoken like someone who has never had to hold a kingdom together. Spoken like someone who lived under the heel of the stories you wrote, she replied. You taught them my name meant filth and treason. You taught them it was right to leave me outside. She didn't raise her voice. The room listened anyway. The price of treason is death, Cade said. Corin smiled faintly. So kill me. Let them see you are no better than the kings who came before. Wrong, Cade said. I'm much worse. I'm going to admit exactly what my father did. In public, with witnesses. His gaze swept the hall, catching on servants and guards as much as nobles. We have built this realm on a lie. That ends today. He looked back at Corin. You don't die to hide the truth, he said. You die because you tried to bury it. It was quick. Bryn did the work, sword flashing, blood dark on the stone. The hall didn't cheer. There was no satisfaction in it, just a grim sense of something overdue, finally accomplished. Later, when they were alone in the quiet of their chambers, Lyra washed the faint spray of blood off Cade's wrist herself. You could have banished him, she said. And risked him finding another Draven? Cade asked. I've had enough of snakes in my walls to last 3 lifetimes. She nodded. You did what you had to, she said. So did you, he replied. You could have walked away 100 times. From the castle, from me, from all of this. I tried, she admitted. Turns out I'm bad at abandoning lost causes. He caught her chin, tilting her face up. I'm not a lost cause, he said softly. No, she agreed. Not anymore. They opened the doors on a storm. Not a storm of snow, a storm of change. Weeks after the battle, when the dead had been buried, and the wounded patched, and the last of Draven's wolves had either bent the knee or fled north, the great hall filled again. This time, servants didn't cling to the edges. They stood in the center as well, shoulder to shoulder with low-ranked warriors and minor nobles. The strict lines of hierarchy that had once separated the room into neat slices were blurred, if not erased. Lyra stepped forward. Her heart hammering was a familiar feeling. That wasn't new. What was new was the silence that followed, the weight of attention without the sting of contempt. I remember this door, she said, laying a hand on the carved oak. Or rather, I remember the wrong side of it. Soft mutters rippled through the room. I remember sitting in the snow, listening to music and laughter I could not share, she continued. I remember shivering, while people inside drank wine I had poured and ate food I had helped prepare. I remember believing that was right, that some of us were meant for the warmth and some of us for the cold. Her fingers tightened on the wood. I was wrong, she said. They were wrong, and we all paid for that lie. She turned back to the hall. As queen, I have a great many things I intend to change, she said. But we will start with the door I know best. She nodded to the guards. They threw the doors wide. Cold air rushed in, along with the faint sounds of the town beyond. Market cries, cartwheels, distant hammers, the smell of smoke and snow, and people living their lives. From this day forward, Lyra said, the doors of this hall will never be barred to those who seek shelter from the cold. Omega, Beta, Alpha, rank will not decide who freezes and who feasts. If there is fire here, it is for all of us. If there is warmth, no one gets locked out. Someone in the back began to clap. It spread slowly at first, as if the room weren't sure whether such an act was allowed. Then it gathered speed, rolling forward like a wave. Servants cheered louder than anyone. Wolves howled, short and sharp and joyous. Cade watched her, eyes bright. You're going to bankrupt us feeding every stray in the city, he murmured when she returned to his side. Good, she said. Money exists to be used. We can always earn more. We can't unfreeze toes. He laughed, low and warm. You're terrifying, he said. I love you. The ease with which he said it, the absolute certainty, still startled her sometimes. The bond between them hummed, steady and bright, but it was the choice, layered over it, that mattered most. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. Good, she echoed. You're stuck with me now. That night, the castle didn't shut its doors when the sun went down. Snow fell in slow fat flakes from a sky lit faintly by stars. Smoke curled from chimneys. Inside, fires burned in every hearth, not just in the great hall, but in rooms that had once been kept cold to save on wood for more important places. Lyra stood on the balcony outside their chambers, cloak wrapped around her shoulders, watching figures move in the courtyard below. Wolves on watch, children dragging each other through drifts, a hunched old woman being guided inside by a guard who would have ignored her weeks ago. Cade stepped out beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. His body heat seeped through the thick fabric, solid and grounding. Thinking dangerous thoughts? He asked. Always, she said. He hummed. I was just thinking, she added, that I spent so long believing warmth was something that could be taken away, held hostage, given out like a reward to those who pleased the right people. And now? He asked. She looked at him. At least one king understands that warmth is a weapon, she said, and he's dangerous enough to wield it without cutting off his own fingers. He smiled, slow and genuine. I'm only dangerous because of the queen who keeps stealing my knives, he said. She leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closing briefly. I was left to freeze in the dark while they celebrated, she said softly. They thought that was the end of my story. It was the beginning, he replied. The wind brushed over them, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the hall, the crackle of fire, the murmur of 100 different conversations. No sharp crack of a steward's clap, no shouts to throw anyone out. Lyra opened her eyes and watched the snow fall into a world that, for all its scars and shadows, finally felt like it had room for her. No more locked doors, no more traitor's daughter, no more illness, just a queen with moonlight in her veins, a king with a beast at his back, and a pack learning that its strength had always come from the wolves it left in the cold. The night pressed close around them, crisp and vast and full of stars. For the first time in her life, Lyra didn't feel outside of it. She felt exactly where she was meant to be. The end. If this story gripped you, subscribe for more immersive paranormal, romance and epic wolf shifter tales told in full audio.